Today we're going to look at the ancient traditions of planting seeds according to the moon phases and the zodiac. Gardeners who rely on planting by the moon phases are convinced that this ancient tradition produces healthier, more vigorous plants with bigger crops. Many gardeners agree that planting by the moon really works. The only way to know for sure is to give moon phase gardening a try. And after all, what can it hurt? And it may just help. Let's learn a little more about how to garden by the moon phases. Gardening by the moon, or the zodiac elements, is an holistic gardening process that allows our gardening practices to root us to our ancestral path. Even in our modern times, we have the opportunity to follow traditions that have been practiced for centuries. Evidence of its practices dates back to the early civilizations of the Euphrates River Valley, and it can be found in the folklore of ancient societies all over the world. Roman historian Pliny the Elder wrote about planting by the moon in his History of Nature. Yet despite such a long history, using the moon to determine the best time to plant and other gardening practices were lost due to modern times and industrialization. But it's time for a revival. At a glance, gardening by the moon or the zodiac can seem like it takes lots of specialized knowledge, or it's a practice shrouded in mystery. However, it just takes awareness of the larger world around you and paying attention to the natural cycles, which is something that anyone can cultivate. Moon gardening simply involves knowing what phase the moon is in, and using that information to know what type of seeds to grow. Can you imagine how powerful it would be to intrinsically know what phase of the moon we were in, like how our ancestors did by simply gazing at the night sky? Most of us know when the moon is full, as she stands bright in the sky, but what about the other more subtle phases? As you have probably noticed, the moon looks different from one day to the next. First we have the new moon that is enshrouded in shadow when the sky appears moonless. This is called a fallow period. This signifies the death of the old before the start of the new, and planting should not begin until you see the first quarter crescent. At other times we see a full moon when the entire face of the moon is illuminated. And of course there are other phases in between. One is waxing or growing with light, comes after the dark new moon and slowly illuminates the moon more and more until a full moon is reached. When we have seen the full moon, the illumination on the moon slowly decreases from the right, and this is called waning, and continues until the moon is fully dark. A new moon is reached again. In the southern hemisphere, the waning illumination will be seen on the left. This is what is called a lunar cycle and lasts for 29.5 days. So how do we know when and what kind of seed to grow according to the moon phase? Full moon. During this phase, the moon is at its brightest with no shadow at all. Energy is drawn down, and after the moon has peaked, the light starts to decrease, which is good for root growth. Plant root crops such as beets, carrots, onions and potatoes. This is also a good phase to transplant any type of plant. Full moons had given names in many ancient cultures. The full moon names we use today often reflect the changing seasons and nature, like harvest moon, strawberry moon and snow moon. Some years have 13 full moons, which makes at least one of them a blue moon, as it doesn't quite fit in with the traditional full moon naming system. However, this is not the only definition of a blue moon. About every 19 years there is no full moon in February. This is one of several definitions of the term black moon. The other definitions refer to a new moon which does not fit in with the equinoxes or solstices similar to a blue moon. When the Julian calendar was introduced in 45 BCE, Latin month names gradually became more common in Europe. However, the ancient pagan names were not forgotten. Old High German month names were introduced by Charlemagne, Charles the Great, who ruled as king of the Franks and later emperor of the Romans from 774 to 814. And Old English or pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon month names were collected by the English monk Venerable Bede in 725. Today, many of these ancient month names have been adopted as names for the full moon of each month. A common explanation published in the Old Farmer's Almanac is that colonial Americans adopted Native American names and incorporated them in the modern calendar. However, it seems that the full moon names we use today also have Anglo-Saxon and Germanic roots. The full moon in January is the wolf moon, named after howling wolves, which may stem from the Anglo-Saxon lunar calendar. Other names, moon after Yule, old moon, ice moon and snow moon, are sometimes used for January full moon. The snow moon is the full moon in February, named after the snowy conditions. Some North American tribes named it the hunger moon due to the scarceness of food during midwinter, while other names are storm moon and chaste moon, but the last name is more common for the full moon in March. The last full moon of the winter season is March, and it's called the worm moon because of the earthworms that come out at the end of winter. It is also known as the crow moon, crust moon, sap moon, sugar moon or chaste moon. The Old English Anglo-Saxon name is Lenten moon. The full moon in April is the pink moon, from the pink flowers that bloom in the early spring. Other names for this full moon include sprouting grass moon, fish moon, hare moon, and the Old English Anglo-Saxon name is egg moon. It is also known as the Paschal moon because it is used to calculate the date for Easter. The May full moon is known as flower moon to signify the flowers that bloom during this month. Other names for the full moon in May are corn planting moon and milk moon from Old English Anglo-Saxon. June's full moon is the strawberry moon, as these little red berries ripen at this time. Other names are hot moon, mead moon and rose moon. The full moon in the month of July is called buck moon, to signify the new antlers that emerge on deer bucks' foreheads around this time. This full moon is also known as thunder moon, wart moon and hay moon from Old English Anglo-Saxon. The full moon in August is called sturgeon moon because of the large number of fish in the lakes where the Algonquin tribes fished. Other names for this full moon include green corn moon, barley moon, fruit moon and grain moon from Old English Anglo-Saxon. The full moon in the month of September in the Old Farmer's Almanac is called harvest moon, which corresponds with the Old English Anglo-Saxon name, while other names are corn moon or full corn moon or barley moon. In October every 3 years, the hunter's moon is also the harvest moon. Traditionally, people in the Northern Hemisphere spent the month of October preparing for the coming winter by hunting and preserving meats to use as food. This led to October's full moon being called the hunter's moon, dying grass moon and blood moon or sanguine moon. However, this should not be confused with the total lunar eclipse blood moon. According to folklore, the full moon in November is named after beavers who became active while preparing for the winter. It is also known as frosty moon, and along with the December full moon, some called it oak moon. Traditionally, if the beaver moon is the last full moon before the winter solstice, it is also called the morning moon. December is the month when winter begins for most in the Northern Hemisphere, and the full moon is called the cold moon. The Old English Anglo-Saxon name is the moon before Yule, while another name is wolf moon. However, this is more common for the January full moon. The waning moon, or decreasing in light after a full moon, and now the shadow is on the right hand side of the moon and the illumination on the left. This will also be reversed in the southern hemisphere, and the illumination will decrease until new moon again. After full moon, when you can see a quarter of the moon in shadow, this is called waning gibbous, until the moon is again half light and half shadow. This phase is called third quarter. Until we see 3/4 shadow and a quarter light, this phase is called waning crescent. These phases of the moon influence how much light is in the garden or not. There are detailed lunar planting calendars available in print or online, such as timeanddate.com, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. You can also download moon phase calendar apps for your mobile device. The new moon, this is when the moon is in its darkest phase and isn't visible in the sky. A new moon is not a good time for planting, but just after, when you just see the first crescent, you can begin to grow. The waxing moon. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, the waxing crescent illumination will be on the right-hand side of the moon and vice versa in the Southern Hemisphere. During this phase, the moon's effect on water in the ground is making it more positively charged, forcing it up to the surface, causing the seeds to swell and burst. There is a surge of energy through the plants and the sap begins to rise through the stems. These factors, along with the increasing moonlight, create balanced root and leaf growth. This is the best time for planting above ground annual crops that produce their seeds outside the fruit, such as lettuce, spinach, celery, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower and grain crops. Cucumbers like this phase also, even though they are the exception to the rule. During the waxing of the moon, the period extended from the day the moon is new to the day it reaches its fullest point. It is suggested that the moon's frequency is responsible for pushing moisture upwards. From an APM perspective, we would consider that the moon plays a part in increasing the positive charge of moisture, thus causing it to rise in our atmosphere and align where its potential is evenly matched with its surroundings. Seeds do well during this time because moisture is available at the surface of the soil, and also increasing light from the growing moon is good for leaf growth. Don't plant below ground plants during this time. The plants will be full of leaves on top, with little growth under the ground. When the moon is waxing, this is the time to start planting annual flowers such as marigolds, nasturtiums and petunias. And is also the best time to plant above ground crops that produce seeds inside of the fruit, like beans, melons, peas, peppers, squash, tomatoes and chili peppers. During the moon's journey across the earth, the moon passes in front of all the zodiac constellations. This alignment is used to guide the best planting days and harvesting days, etc. As we know from our horoscopes, each constellation is affiliated with an element: earth, air, fire and water. Earth signs are Taurus, Virgo and Capricorn and are associated with roots. Air signs are Gemini, Libra and Aquarius. They are associated with flowers. Fire signs are Aries, Leo and Sagittarius and are associated with fruits and seeds. Water signs are Cancer, Scorpio and Pisces. These are associated with leaves. For example, eggplants are a fruit. These would be planted on a fire sign, such as Leo. Carrots, for instance, are a root vegetable and would be planted on an earth sign, such as Taurus. The 12 signs of the zodiac are also associated with body parts. Aries represents the head, Taurus for the neck and throat, Gemini for the arms and chest, Cancer for the breasts, Leo the heart and back, Virgo for the bowels, Libra the kidneys, Scorpio the loins, Sagittarius the thighs, Capricorn the knees, Aquarius for the legs and Pisces the feet. Starting with Aries the head, the frequency runs down your body to end at Pisces, 2 or 3 days each month, and the frequency starts again. There are 4 signs that are very fertile, and you want to plant when the moon is in these signs. You can remember them by this saying: signs plant thick crops. Signs meaning Scorpio, plants for Pisces, thick for Taurus and crops for Cancer. And how do we find when the moon is in a sign? The Farmer's Almanac is a great wealth of information, and I'll leave a link to that and to a moon and zodiac phase calendar in the description, but there's plenty of others online where you can find what signs rule on what day. Aries and Leo, that's the head and the heart, they are killing signs, so don't plant anything if the moon is in these signs. Then there are a series of so-so signs that run from thighs to knees and legs, which are Sagittarius, Capricorn and Aquarius. And one of the things you do in these signs, if you can catch the time when the moon is in a dark phase or waning and the signs are moving out of the body, this is the time to make changes. Repot or transplant your plants, and on a personal note, things like stopping smoking, going on a diet, starting a new job or moving house, this is a great time to do these things. So to recap, the darker the moon, the sign is moving out of the body. There are 2 phases of the moon each month, the light phase, waxing, and the dark phase, waning, and they last 14 days each. You want to plant in the light of the moon for above ground crops, and when the new moon is in the sky to full moon, that's when you want to plant below ground crops. Air and fire signs are considered barren, a time to skip the planting and focus on weeding and pruning. The sign of Libra is an exception to that rule. It is semi-fertile and good for blooming herbs and flowers, tubers, roots and vines. Weed in the sign of Leo, so seeds won't sprout. Do your harvesting in a fourth quarter fire sign to preserve fruit and vegetables for storage. According to the lunar calendar, root crops such as carrots, turnips and potatoes produce the best yields if planted when the moon is in the sign of Capricorn. Above ground crops like annual flowers and vegetables are said to benefit from planting while the moon is in Cancer. Put very simply, to garden by the signs, you plant when the moon is both waxing and in a fertile water or earth sign. Do weeding, tilling and harvesting when the moon is waning and in a barren sign. One more tip, don't plant on a Sunday. It's designated as a fiery barren day, not suitable for planting regardless of what sign it's under. The occurrence of Easter is based on the lunar calendar, and it makes a little more sense if you know about gardening with the moon signs. Easter falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon, following the spring equinox. The 2 to 4 days following a full moon are often the most fertile for planting, according to the lunar calendar. Good Friday is recognised as the best planting day of the spring for certain crops like potatoes. So does it matter? That's always a good question when exploring things in the unseen. It is touted that when plants are sown at the right timing of the moon phase and birth sign, plants do better. They show increased growth, better resiliency against pests, larger harvests and take longer to go to seed. There is not much scientific evidence that astrological gardening or planting by the moon phase has any beneficial effects. Now it's your turn. Test the validity of gardening by the moon in your own garden. Plant some crops by the correct moon phase or birth sign and others by the wrong moon phase or sign. Experiment with above ground and below ground crops. I'm going to try this way of planting this year to see if it makes a difference. Happy gardening!